unusual. Used to be that we would get on a plane and fly to Taiwan to do these in person. And I will say, although we can't be there in person, this is the next best thing. I still prefer to come to Taiwan, but maybe next year we'll get there. I'd like to just introduce myself.
Yeah, of course.
If I can get there we go. So my name's Ed Marandola. I'm one of the founders of X-Nav Technologies. I've been in the dental business a long time, the dental equipment business, mostly through imaging side. So we came out originally.
Nina, 你的麦克风 Nina.
And then we developed the i-CAT. So most people would know us from the i-CAT. Chris Sharp, also one of our founders. He has been with me since
Nina.
Has been with me since the start of Imaging Sciences. And then Dr. Emery, who was one of our amazing customers, become a great friend. Started with me when we started X-Nav here. But X-Nav as a company is a lot more than just the three of us. We're the founders. We have an amazing team, a development team that is truly product developers. And I talk about this because it's important to understand the importance of developing a product. There are great product developers that create great products, and there are great scientists. And they're different ways of approaching problems. We have amazing product developers. We don't just develop technology. We take that technology to solve a problem, to make your life easier, to think about how to make technology work for you instead of you having to work for the technology. We have PhDs who have done guided work in bronchoscopy, and then advanced people in CT and optics. So we have a total of 350 years of medical and dental product experience. Let me give you a quick update.
各位医师有医生那个的麦克风，不好意思，再次强调，麦克风请关掉，有人在讲话。比较年轻的医师做的有点超过。现在应该是有医师，你的麦克风。
医师就听。我们传统上慢性鼻窦炎是讲3个月。
有医师。麦克风。
传统上来讲，至少在3个月以上的鼻窦炎，以末药物治疗没有效才考虑手术。所以基本上，随着内科疗法也是单纯药。
Sorry, Ed, please go ahead. I will call him.
Okay.
他说他在年轻的时候，那个小孩子因为慢性鼻窦炎找他开刀，平均要等2年。
有医师。
要等2年。换句话说，他手术是非常多，手术非常多。但是后来他采取
to be able to click on them and mute
完整的内科疗法之后，他2年的时间只开了3开刀，那这3开刀里面呢，有2个小朋友呢是唐氏症的小朋友。
Sorry, I will call the engineer guy.
You should be able to click on that person and then mute them. As the host, you can mute anyone.
Okay.
There we go. So our first product at X-Nav is the X-Guide, and I'm just going to give you a quick, just so you know that this is a product that's here to say. We've now navigated over 150,000 implants with the X-Guide. We have regulatory approval and shipments in 42 countries. We are translated and released into 22 different languages. We have 30 patents granted to us in many different countries, 15 trademarks, 30 universities. we're the only navigation unit in the industry that's cleared for full edentulous, and we're the only navigation unit that has FDA clearance for virtual registration. And you see that little strip there that says accuracy, ease of use, software, full arch. They're the reasons why we're so successful. We've applied technology so that it's easy for everyone to use and simple for you to not have to learn all about the technology. You only have to learn how to use it. Big difference between the two. So at the top there, we say guide every patient, every implant, every time. It's very important to understand that you guys do a great job today with implants. Everybody puts in implants with freehand and it works well. They're successful. X-Guide isn't about about putting implants in. It's about making you better. It's about giving you another tool. And Dr. Emery will talk more about this, but we're giving you the ability to have that clinical accuracy with surgical flexibility of freehand. So it's like a freehand surgery. In fact, it is a freehand surgery, but you can achieve the same accuracy as a guide. And that's a big change. That's great for patients. It's great for dentistry in general. The other thing is that you cannot guide everything today. So all the dental applications, you'll find that when you have an X-Guide, your sinus elevations will be crestal sinus elevations, and you'll be doing significantly less lateral approaches. Everything will be more minimally invasive. You'll be choosing when to open a flap, and you'll be choosing those things when they're needed, not just to be able to see where you're placing an implant. You'll have the high aesthetic areas where it's really important. All of these are just clinical applications to dentistry that really strengthen what you'll be able to do and the way you'll be able to do it. Here's a quick look at the machine. It's not very big. The base of that machine is only 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters, if I did my math right. But what's really important is that boom arm reaches out by a couple of meters and is out of your way. The whole device is away from your staff. It's got this amazing computer inside that allows things to move very quickly. The stereo cameras have this large baseline for high accuracy, and we have these special LEDs so that the lighting that our cameras see is unique to us, and it doesn't get affected by whatever's going on in your surgical suite. So what is it? It's real-time, turn-by-turn guidance. It's navigation. It's doing everything that gives you the exact position, the exact angle, the exact depth on a single target with anatomy. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but we're the only company that does something like this. It's a unique way to be able to perform navigation. So just give you a quick little demonstration here. I'll talk you through this. So here he's measuring the length of the drill bit. There you see it takes 2 seconds. This is what's called system check. This is how you know that the system is accurate. You can see it. You don't have to guess. You don't have to depend upon everything. You can see what you're doing every single time. You take that blue point, you put it on the X, which is where your planned implant is, and then we're going to take that green circle and put it over top, and you're going to have perfect guidance every single time. And you'll be able to move. You don't have any restrictions of water flow going into the bone. You can pump the drill up and down. Everything is normal like you would normally do it, but you get that accurate position all the time. So I talked about this target, and if you look here, this is the implant that we planned. That's the platform. Each one of these little tick marks is 1 millimeter, so that shows you the accuracy of what you're working at. You're always working sub-millimeter. All you do is the tip of your drill. You put that on the X, and then you rotate this green over top of the blue, and it will look just like that. Now you're all set perfectly in the center, and then as you start to drill, this yellow is your depth, and you can see it tracks right down here on the implant itself. And you start with yellow, go to green, then go to red. You know, the green is where you've reached the planned depth, and red means you may have gone over a slight bit. This process of doing all of this with anatomy has been awarded patents throughout the world. What are some of the quick key benefits? Fast workflow, lower cost, the ability to alter your surgical plan during surgery. So everybody thinks, hey, we've got this guide, we put it in, but then we go to do a surgery and things are a little different than we planned them. Maybe we didn't plan it perfectly. Maybe the anatomy has changed a little bit. Maybe the bone is softer. Maybe you want to make a slight alteration. The great thing about guidance is you just click over, you make your change, and then you go right back and you can have that same accuracy with your new plan right then and there. You don't have to worry about fit issues, no surgical space issues. Your staff knows what's going on, and it can all be done minimally invasive. You can guide everything the same day. As fast as you can have a CT is as fast as you can guide your implant. So how does it work? So I talked about stereo cameras. So if you look, we have 2 stereo cameras here. They track down to these patterns. One is capturing the patient's motion, and the other is capturing your drill. This all is happening really, really fast. That's what these fast computers and cameras allow us to do. And it just is going to provide you this super accurate system. Here it is in live view. So this is a live view of our cameras. And you can see it finds each one of these intersections. All these green dots are intersections that allow us to know which pattern that is. And then we can then triangulate that pattern. The difference, one of the unique technologies, and this is where technology comes into play as opposed to product development. We've done this where we're doing 600 points, 300 on the handpiece, 300 on the patient, and we're tracking all of those points. That many points means that tracking is not going to get lost because we don't need them all. We just need a subset of them. But when you're tracking that many, the tracking is always going to be there. Plus, we use this violet light, which has a smaller wavelength for high accuracy, but you don't lose anything from your environment, from the surgical lights that may switch on that'll cause the loss of navigation. None of those things happen. This is where we have thought through the technology for you as the doctor. And I'm willing to say that we probably have the most accurate navigation system in the world, and I'd probably even put ourselves up against all of the big medical manufacturers like Medtronic or BrainLab, which have these, multi-million-dollar systems. All of our stuff is backed up with evidence. This is an evidence-based device. You can see our accuracy, 220 microns. It's still all up to you to control it, but you have the ability to be able to control up to that point. Our studies show that we're 11 times more accurate than freehand. And that study was done based on expert doctors, not based on everybody. So these are people who have placed more than 10,000 implants in their life, been doing it, for 10 to 20 years of putting implants in. So these were highly skilled, and you're still 11 times more accurate than freehand. Why is that? Because our eyes can't see what the computer can see. So if you look here, this is what's called the parallel effects. And if you're looking, you see a different surgical space than is actually available. And the cameras know exactly where everything is. So they can figure out where that implant needs to be, where you planned it. Here's an example of this. If you look at this picture and to look at this picture, people thought when they took the picture that they didn't guide correctly. But over here, what they realized was they just put their mirror off. If you look down here, let me restart this video. You're going to see as you move the object around, your eyes project the object differently. Sorry. So you can see the implant's staying in the same place, but it visually looks like it's moving. And that's all because of this parallax effect. So I'm trying to put this simple terms. You use a backup camera. Most people have them today. If you look out your window, you can't see everything, but the cameras allow you to see this object that's sitting behind the car. In this case, it could be, this is my partner Chris's, could be his 4-year-old son who was standing behind the car, but the camera can see that. Where he's looking out the old way, he's twisting his neck, not very ergonomic, looking and can't see everything. This is the difference between what navigation gives you versus what freehand does for you today. And then you add things like centering lines and allows you to put the car into the perfect spot every single time. So what's new? We're going to talk a little bit about some of the way we did things and things that are coming here. So our workflow has always been scan, which is your 3D cone beam CT, plan, and we'll talk about different ways of planning. We have our own planning software, but we also work with others. And then navigate. And navigation is really what we're bringing to the table. It's the tool that you don't have today. X-Mark is the new method that we have for what we call registration. So in all of these navigation systems, you have to register the optical world, which is the cameras, to the CT world, which we took a CT of the patient and planned our case. Those two worlds have to get registered together. X-Mark now allows us to do that virtually with the with the patient's anatomy. And how we do that is we pick these points and on the anatomy, and then we touch them with this probe. And very quickly we can figure out where that whole where that whole CT is in space. So scanning, one of the benefits of X-Mark, which is different than most of the machines in the field. And for people who are on this call who already have an X-Guide, X-Mark will be coming. It's something that will be upgradable on your machine. We're just waiting for regulatory approval. COVID has slowed us down. Getting documents to Taiwan, and then Taiwan's been slowed down a little bit too. So hopefully, maybe sometime in late Q3 or early Q4, we'll have all the regulatory approval for this for Taiwan. But it does allow us to use small fields of view, which we couldn't do before. So small and medium fields of view, anything, you don't have to have anything in the patient's mouth at the time of CT when you're using X-Mark. Our typical workflow includes planning. Here's typical planning where you're drawing out the arch, looking at the, drawing the nerve, getting all of your anatomy identified. We have a special algorithm that defines what are the teeth in the bone. Then we can place virtual teeth if you want. You don't have to do that, but you can. It helps you identify where you want to put the implants. Then you place the implants. You can see we have simple things like halos that allow you to quickly determine what anatomy and how far away it is. This one here is 3 millimeters. This one's 1.5 millimeters away. We have these little nudge tools to make things fast and easy for you. We have ways of showing the angle of the abutment so you can understand where the trajectory of the implant is versus the way the abutment might be set up. All great planning tools. Of course, putting an optical intraoral scan like a Trios scan, that makes things even easier from the standpoint of planning, because now you have the patient's anatomy at a much higher accuracy, and we can put those things together very simply in our software. So we've done the scan, we've done the plan, and now we're getting ready to go ahead and navigate. So we have this little clip when the patient has teeth, and we'll get into edentulous a little bit later, but you just put this in hot water. It's got some thermoplastic in there. You make an impression, you chill it, and then it snaps on and off. You can see the pictures of it right here. We attach our trackers to it and then snap it on the patient. We do a couple of calibrations. They're not long. You see 25 seconds each. So less than a minute of calibrations to make sure everything is ready to go. Calibrations are important too, because things change. Your hand pieces change, parts change over time. You drop them. All kinds of different things happen, and the calibrations make sure that you're getting all those changes are included in what you're doing today. So when you have things that are factory calibrated, they always have to go back to the factory. And here, when you calibrate right before the surgery, you know you're getting the best calibration possible. So here's how X-Mark works. So you mark 3 points on the patient. So here we're going to mark a point. That's now we're going to go over and maybe grab a cusp of a tooth. So going to move around, decide. And these are points that you know that you can find and touch. Now we'll go down maybe to CEJ and grab another point. Now we're ready to mark those. Now we've marked those points, and we'll jump right into registering them. Really simple. We're going to take that probe, and you can see down in the corner here, he touches the point, and he goes over to the next point, clicks that button, and that's how fast it registers. What you're seeing is actually live, is how fast it happens. Once you're done with the 3 points of registration, now you're going to go in and you're going to do a system check. Once again, you're going to check to make sure that the system worked. Now with X-Mark, because you're going against virtual anatomy, it's not always perfect. So we have a way to fix it if it's not perfect. One way would be you can always add some more points. But the other way, we have a way to trace onto the points. And you're going to see that here. Here, we're going to just click a point, and we're going to start tracing on the tooth. And when we're tracing, we're collecting 200 points at a time of the surface of that tooth. And then we'll relate that back to the anatomy. So that gives us a higher fidelity if our first try didn't work with standard X-Mark. So you have X-Mark, and then you have this refinement step that makes it even better. So it always allows you to get to a final result of that super high accuracy that you want. And you're going to see we're going to touch down when we're done here, and you'll see that the system check will be perfect. You have to do at least 3 areas, and we're trying to get areas around the anatomy so that we have enough to register. And if you look, as he's touching those points, everything is perfectly on. That's how you know that you've made a great registration. Now we're ready to navigate. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our handpiece, put the first drill bit in. We touch down on that go plate. That allows us to measure. And then we start to do our first drilling. Here's a live surgery that Dr. Emery did. We're going to look at 2 teeth being drilled. So he's going to come in here. Now, this was probably prior to us having X-Mark, so he probably just did a navigation. He did a calibration of the X-clip. But here he's touching down. You can see him angling it up, getting to be the perfect angle, and then he's drilling. And you can see the depth going down. You'll see him drill all the way down to the depth of which it turns green. And you can see him pumping like you normally would do. You're moving in and out. You're letting the water get down and cool the bone. You don't have to change the way you do things every single day. There, he's completed his first one. Now he'll just switch over to the other tooth and come right in and do exactly the same thing. Touches down, starts to drill in. It's almost there. Our planned depth always ends at the 9 o'clock position. So you can see he's got a 12 millimeter implant that's going in there. So he's drilling down 12 millimeters deep. And there he goes, turns green, and he's done. Remember, I said one of the important things is you might want to change during surgery. All you do is click back to one icon. So over here is your surgical icons. You click right over here to the implant plan. You make your change, and then you go right back into navigation. You don't have to do any calibrations. You can do this right live during surgery. It only takes a minute or 2. So let's talk about some of the newer things that have come that have allowed our full arch cases. And we call it full arch because there's a lot of ways to think about it. Sometimes there's terminal teeth. Sometimes it's a fully edentulous. Sometimes you're doing dual arch or immediate full arches. So workflow's a little bit different. The one difference is when the patient's edentulous, we don't have a way to attach that patient tracker to the teeth. So in this case, we're going to surgically attach that arm. And now we have these new screws called EDX. And again, they should be available in Taiwan as soon as this latest filing gets through, which is hopefully in Q4 of this year. These are what they look like. So this part goes into the bone. This part is where the soft tissue engages. So it's just a small stabbing system. You put 2 screws in, and then.
所以我觉得他是算蛮认真的。
对，我就是看他认真，他再来一点。
There we go. Here's what it looks like in a live patient. So you can see the 2 screws are in there. Once these are all in and stable, and this is a very, very stable attachment, Dr. Emery will talk a little bit more about it in a more clinical world. You can do your X-Mark, and then move right along and place your implants. So this is the same X-Mark that I showed you earlier. Here is the edentulous case. Again, you're clicking and touching each one of the points. If you have to, you can refine. And here's a real case. So I'm not going to play a video here, but this gives us a little time study to see how long did it take us to do a terminal dentition case. So terminal dentition, it took about 5 minutes to place these 2 screws and attach the tracker, and about 8 minutes to do the X mark with the refinement so that he had everything perfect. Then he placed 4 implants, so this was an all-on-4 case. In 35 minutes, he navigated all 4 implants, and he did that. All of those were placed with an angular deviation of under 1 degree. And, when you're looking at those angular deviations, they're so important because it affects the final restoration. One of the things is that you have lots of options on fitting treatment plans. So what we've learned is that, and this gets back to this world of product development, it's not one thing that fixes everything. It's understanding all the different cases. Every patient's not the same. Everybody thinks, you look at things sort of generally when you talk about a patient, but every patient plan is custom, and we allow you to choose and determine which is the best way for each patient. We now have straight handpieces available. You'll see here that that we have the same exact attachment. The system knows whether it's a straight handpiece just by the calibrations. And now you can approach differently. You can use different speeds. We have a new handpiece adapter that allows us to attach to more and more different models of different handpieces. So you can pick your favorite one, and we can most likely attach to it. Here's another big thing is integrations with other softwares. So today, for the last couple of years, we've integrated with Nobel Biocare's DTX Studio. And that means you can do all the planning in their software, click a button, and then move that over to your X-Guide. So now you've planned it there, and you can move it over. So a lot of times, some of these more mature programs have a lot more features that we might not have in our software. That's fine. You can use their software and still send it over to your X-Guide. So think of the X-Guide as another tool that you're going to use every single day. And now we're just announcing 3Shapes Implant Studio. So we just announced this, actually, I think this week. So it's another big, strong, powerful software that will allow you to plan in Implant Studio, click a button, and send off to the and send it off to your X-Guide. And I think that's all of my part. So, Poe, I'm going to let you turn it over to.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. OK， 好，那我们接下来我们刚刚听到了这么多好玩的精彩的新的科技，那我们现在郑重邀请临床上我们怎么实验证实这些技术呢？那我们掌声欢迎 Dr. Robert Emery. Yes, sir. Dr. Emery, it's your time.
Yes.
Thank you. Please share your screen.
Well, first, I want to thank Poe and High Clearance for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm going to be talking primarily today about the new developments for full arch restorative dentistry, and because that's what everyone is always talking about when they talk about navigation. So when I went to Taiwan before, I talked about all the different things that you could do with it. Ed touched upon it: sinus lifts, ridge splitting, taking out third molars. You can do a lot of different things with it. But today I'm going to talk to you about the real exciting developments in full arch. When I was in Taiwan before, I made some new friends. I saw that a number of them are on the call tonight, and I had a wonderful time. And I wish Actually, I wish I was back there in Taiwan eating all the wonderful food that I had when I was there last time, because I came back heavier than I was when I got there. Always I have, as an academic, I have to say I have a financial interest in X-Nav Technologies. You've seen that. I'm one of the founders, proud of it. And I'm going to go on from here. The workflow, as Ed touched upon, is really straightforward and simple. We scan and we do our exams, and then we plan, and then we go ahead and navigate. But we need more than that. I mean, if you're like me, you want to be the top of the best of the best, and you need other tools. And so in each one of these things, we have opportunities to use other tools. As far as, exam and CTs and 3D imaging, we want to use intraoral scanners. We want to use digital smile design. We want to the ability to use dual scans. And everybody thinks about dual scans for dentures, but I use dual scans on full arch crown and bridge cases all the time. I'll take the temps off, put fiducials on them, and CT the beautiful temps that my prosthodontic colleagues have made, put them back in the patient's mouth with the fiducials, and take a CT. And those are the kind of things you might not think about right offhand. Big development with Xmark is that we can use any CT. I have a lot of my endo colleagues send me patients with, they've done small field CTs, and I can now use those small field CTs to guide a case because I don't need the X-clip inside the CT anymore. Ed talked to you about the development of different prosthetic platforms. I mean, the maturity of the treatment planning software is significant now. So now we have 3 that are turnkey right in and out of the X-Guide, and that's the X-Guide software itself, which is really simple to use, and DTX Studio, and now 3Shape. That's very exciting. And those all give you the ability with your prosthetic plans to make provisionals ahead of time and custom healing abutments. So all the tools that you have at your fingertips now go in and out of the X-Guide. And finally, the big picture stuff, and the ability to attach a tracker to any patient anytime. We're not just talking, single tooth or partially dentate. It's easy now to attach a tracker to an edentulous patient. And maybe if you're doing some extremely complex craniofacial surgery and some of the more complex things that are, off label, you're going to be able to attach trackers to absolutely any patient. And then you're going to use the patient's own anatomy to register their patient. And the refinement tool is not just for the fully arched, the fully edentulous patients. If you have an X-clip and it's rocking, or it doesn't fit tight, or the patient's been away for a long time and it's off a little bit, you don't need to rock it anymore. You can use refinement to correct an X-clip. So what you're seeing in the development of the product, as Ed said, is that we're going from the beginning, and now we're just expanding with all these new tools to make your life easier. So let's talk about the full arch system, the EDX family of screws and parts. And for those of you who like plates and screws, the CLX arms. So the workflow for the full arch cases is this one, what you've heard, with a couple of extra parts in it. We got to plan the place and the case, and we can fabricate our provisionals ahead of time using the turnkey approaches that Ed showed you, which was either the R software or DTX Studio or 3Shape. And then we go ahead and my staff calibrates the parts. If you want to be efficient and not waste time, you want your staff to do as much as you can. And my staff calibrates. They even bring in the CTs and superimpose the STL files for me. And then I check everything. They'll even start the planning, some of the more advanced. And then again, I check everything. Then we have to attach a tracker arm to the patient some way. And in full arch cases, that can be challenging. So we're going to spend some time on that. Then we need to register our patients. And the way I put it to my patients is I say, I've planned your case and I've done your surgery in the virtual world. And when I register you, I bring you from the real world into the virtual world. And when I start the surgery on the patients that are awake, I say, you are now in the virtual world. They get a big kick out of that. Then I refine if I need to. And if I'm doing an X-clip and it's rocking, I can refine it. And then I navigate. Now we're going to be talking a lot about attachments because it's easily overlooked. People will say, oh, I want to navigate a zygoma. Well, nice zygomas are off-label. So if you want to navigate them, that's off-label, but you can do it. But how are you going to attach a tracker to a patient that has no bone in the maxilla? Most of the time, they haven't thought about that. So this is the answer. The EDX family of parts includes the screws and the arms and the nuts that hold them together. And for people who like to use plates and screws, the clover leaf, that's what CLX stands for. Tracker arms are used with our present screws. You can use them with any screw that's available to you. The screws come in 2.7 millimeter diameters. They come in 3 different lengths. And then the screwdriver and then different arms. The important thing to see here is that these are minimally invasive. You can use these through stab incisions. You don't have to make an incision, a large incision, to use these. So what do I recommend, especially if you're starting? First off, we have to talk about where we're going to put these things. What do I think is the best place to put them? And it's in the front of the mouth. It's easy to work in the front of the mouth because you're going straight in. So you want to use in the mandible, the symphysis. You don't want to go posteriorly because it's hard to put anything back there. And in a lot of our complete arch cases, they might be edentulous and there's no bone back there anyway. And in the maxilla, the piriform rim, the floor of the nose, the nasal spine area always has the best bone. And even in those tough cases, really edentulous atrophic patients, there's always some bone up there. So these are different images of the incisions that we use. We can use a stab incision, which you see on your left. A crestal incision, to be honest with you, that's what we use most of the time, because in most complete full arch cases, we're going to be doing significant bone reduction. And that means you got to make a large incision to do the bone reduction. You're not doing the large incision to do the surgery for the implants. You're doing it to remove the bone. And then in the maxilla, I almost always start with a vertical midline incision. And I'll show you why. The tracker arms, once you've placed them, are out of the way. So some of the issues with optical interference are removed when we're doing our hardest cases. The other thing is this system is so rigid that it's actually more accurate than the X-clip because it doesn't rock, it doesn't move. The arms and the screws actually hold the lip out of the way, so they act as a retractor. Now, what we call I call the starter set is 2 screws, the green screws, and 2 arms, an upper arm and a lower arm. Now, I'm right-handed and either sit or stand. In the maxilla, I stand, and in the mandible, I sit. And I always put the tracker away from me. If someone's got to be inconvenienced during surgery, it's going to be my assistant. It's not going to be me. And so I put the tracker on the left side. If you were a left-handed surgeon and you sat at 15 on the clock, you would get the opposite side maxilla and mandible. If you want, you can get a shorter screw in the mouth. And when you first look at these, you say, well, I don't want a longer screw because it will get in the way. But actually, the longer screws hold the plate farther away from the bone. So they give you, or the arm farther away from the bone. They give you more room to work to do your bone reduction and drilling around the arm. But for really small, thin patients, the blue screw is available. Now, when we do extraoral, and you say, well, when would you do an extraoral patient? Well, when I do patients, I'm going to show you two patients. One is a patient with scleroderma that couldn't open her mouth, and the other was a patient who had trauma and didn't have any intact maxillary bone. It was all bone grafted. So there's nothing in the mouth and the maxilla in that patient to hold a tracker. And the patient who had scleroderma, you couldn't put anything in her mouth. So you can do, if those people that are doing craniofacial surgery in hospital cases can now operate with the X-Guide in the OR and work on absolutely anyone. And these are images. The one on the left, on your left, is a scleroderma. You can see the patient has the typical facies of a scleroderma patient. She couldn't open her mouth, and I'm talking about her lips, any more than 15 millimeters. It's impossible to put a tracker in her mouth, and it would be impossible to guide her case with a static guide. This patient, you can see these scars underneath the arm, and she had been in pretty significant trauma, and I had reconstructed her maxilla with bone, but that bone isn't, solid enough to hold the tracker arm with the cantilever of the tracker on it. So I did two simple stab incisions on the cheek and put these in, and you can see the scars on her face. She wouldn't care. But those of you who do orthognathic surgery, I put trocars through patients' cheeks all the time. Young, beautiful people really care about their appearance, and it doesn't look anything more than a pimple in 8 weeks. And so there's two arms. There's a mandible extraoral arm and a zygoma extraoral arm. And again, you either use the green screws, and you're seeing the green screws over and over again. And that's why I say use them as your starter kit. And then there's a yellow screw or a gold screw that is for patients that have higher BMIs, they're obese patients, or thicker tissues extraorally. You're going to need some kind of plate bender to bend these arms. You will ruin your wire twisters if you try to bend these arms with a wire twister. So get yourself plate benders. You'll need two of them. So planning where you're going to put the EDX screws. The first thing you do is you plan your implants. And then the next thing you do is you plan your bone reduction. And your bone reduction is not dependent on using a static guide, prolongation, and those kind of things. It's completely about the platforms of your implants now. We then plan the screws apical to the implants if possible. If you have to go between the implants, that's okay too. Then we measure the distance from the existing alveolar ridge to the screw using your software. Okay, now we've planned where we want them. And you can use, on the new software, there's something called preps. And they're smaller implants. They're one or 2 millimeter implants. You can use those to plan the screws. Or you can just use other implants and make them 2.7 by 7 millimeters. So now you're ready to go to surgery. You plan your incision, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. Then you measure the approximate position of the screws with a pair of calipers. And most of the time, it's about the height, and they're around 20 to 25 millimeters down. Then you drill a pilot hole. You place your first screw, and then you use the arm to measure the approximate position of your second screw. And you drill your pilot hole, and you try to keep them parallel. And I'm going to go through this in more detail. So this is me planning a full arch case using a dual scan of a denture. You can see the fiducials on the denture. So the way that's done, again, is we take the denture, we put fiducials on it, sticky fiducials, and then we take a CT of the denture. Then we take that denture with the fiducials on it, put it in the patient's mouth, and scan the patient. When we plan, we pull in the CT of the patient with the denture in it. And then in the software, we pull in the CT of the denture itself. And the software for X-Nav automatically superimposes the denture on the patient's CT. And you can see I've turned on the grid, which is right here. It's lit up in green in the middle. And that allows me to see the position of the implant platform relative to the prosthetic platform of the implant and the occlusal plane of the denture. So I can plan my prosthetic components, for a hybrid, you're going to want a minimum of 15 millimeters. Each one of those grids is 5. The next thing is I plan my bone reduction. My bone reduction is dependent on the platforms of my implants. And I put implants in, or the new software, it has preps of just above the level of the platforms of the implants. And what I'm looking for here is when I'm going to go ahead and guide this with a straight handpiece, is I make a hole at each one of these rods when I'm doing surgery, and I'll show you this in a little bit. And then I just connect the dots. Straight cut software is coming, but you'll still need to plan your bone reduction. Then I plan my screw positions. Again, I make implants or rods the size of the screw, 2.7 by 7. And I look for good, solid cortical bone. You can see I'm planning a maxillary case, and I'm looking at the nasal spine over here on the left. And then I want to make them as parallel as I can, because if they're too divergent, then the arm won't fit onto the plate. The plate won't fit on the screw, so I want to keep them parallel, and I'll go over that in a minute again. So the screw arm and the screws in the arm dimensions. The threads of the screws are 7 millimeters. The distance from the shoulder or the end of the thread to the platform is 8 millimeters with the green screws. And then the nuts and the plates are 8 millimeters total. Then the arms start at 10 millimeters. That's the smallest distance between the two, and they go up to 15. So you always, if you can, the slot gives you some play in where you put your screws. So some important considerations when you're putting these screws in. Number one, you want keep the screws as parallel as you can. So when you put the first one in and you're screwing in the second one, you want to make sure that you keep the two screws as parallel as possible. They can be off a little bit. Probably the biggest problem is convergence versus divergence. And then the other thing that's easy to forget is you want to place the shoulders of the two screws as close to the same level as you get. If they're too far off, the threads for the nuts won't be engaged. And this is something that I think is really important to remember. If you're going to be taking teeth out, and the majority of the full arch cases that I see are mutilated dentition cases or terminal dentition cases, and there's a bunch of bad teeth. And particularly in the mandible, where there's not a lot of vertical bone, sometimes you're at a loss of where to put these screws. And I put them right into roots of teeth that I'm going to be removing later. And they go rock solid into roots of teeth. So the approach would be, you'd go ahead, measure where you're going to put them. If a tooth is there that you're going to be removing, that's a great site to put one of these screws. And so then you go ahead and register the patient after you've put the arm on and put in your implants. Then when you're all done, take your arm off, take the screws out, and take that last tooth out or those last 2 teeth out. So don't be afraid to put these screws right into teeth that you're going to be removing. So in this is that case that I show, another case that I'm showing you. This is a full arch crown and bridge case, actually. You can see I put fiducials on a temporary, and I'm planning where I'm going to be putting these EDX screws. I have enough room, in this case, 22.6 millimeters from the tip of this tooth prep down to where I want to put my EDX screw. Now, maxillary incision design, I always start with a midline vertical incision, and then I go and I dissect down to the area of the nasal spine, and I look for where there's nice solid cortical bone. And then I would measure the distance and put in my first screw. If I needed to extend the incision, I can always extend it down to a crestal incision if I need to. If I'm doing a full arch case with a lot of bone reduction in the maxilla, I'll just start with a crestal incision and bring it up. A lot of times in the maxilla, you'll still have a midline incision anyway. So I always start with that vertical midline incision in the maxilla. In the mandible, if there's going to be a lot of bone reduction, again, there's almost always is in these full arch cases, I just do a crestal incision. But if I'm not, say I have a patient who has a very atrophic mandible, I'll just do stab incisions. So let's move on to some clinical examples of patients. Let's do an all-on-4, a terminal dentition for a hybrid case. This is going to be a completely digital workflow. We're going to use Nobel DTX Studio or DTX to plan the case in the prosthetics, where you're going to use the digital denture software Avident to design the denture using digital smile design. And we're going to use the EDX family of parts. So this is a classic terminal dentition patient. You can see the patient has a lot of wear and they've lost the vertical. The software in DTX is really nice because it allows you to stack multiple STL files. So the patient had photographs taken for digital smile design, had intraoral impressions taken for that had extension deep into the vestibule, and then had mounted models, and all that was scanned and sent to the lab. So we had mounted models with records for the vertical that we wanted to choose, and we also had photographs, and that was all sent to the lab. The lab then went ahead and planned the denture, and the model of the patient was used to jump between the Avident software and the DTX Studio software. So that's why you see the model there. That's how you jump between the two software systems, because the model is registered to both using the teeth in the patient and using the teeth in the Avident software. Then the implants were planned with DTX Studio, and all the components are picked. And in this case, what you're seeing here is they're actually planning for a little handle on the denture for your transfer, and what are called occlusal locks in the mandible. So the arrows point to the occlusal locks posteriorly, and then you can see the handle. So this is for your pickup at the time of surgery. The way this case is going to be done is the maxillary teeth are going to be extracted. The denture is going to be relined in place. A bite's been made to seat the denture using the patient's mandibular dentition at the time of surgery. And then these occlusal locks in the handle are going to be used to hold the denture in place during the transfer. And you can see here the slots have been cut on the extension in the posterior. So at the time of surgery, it's easier to convert this prosthesis to a hybrid. The beauty of these prostheses is that if you couldn't load the case, you have dentures to use if you want to. So here's the DTX plan that's been exported as an X-Guide file and imported into the X-Guide. And when that is done, you can see the STL files of the implants in the X-Guide. At the time of surgery, my staff selects the instruments. And in this case, I'm going to use a guided straight handpiece. Now, this is the patient at the time of surgery. And what I'm doing is I'm going to put the patient in occlusion, and I'm going to seat the denture and do a soft reline. And so this is a lot like orthognathic surgery. You use the mandible to set the maxilla. Now, in the mandible, we're going to turn this into a hybrid. The maxilla is going to stay an immediate denture. I'm going to be doing extensive bone reduction. If you saw that last plan, there's almost a centimeter and a half of bone reduction. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a crestal incision. And then I'm going to put my 2 screws in through that crestal incision. So here we are. I've made the crestal incision, and I'm putting my screws in place. And when you tighten these down, you can tighten them down really, really fast, and you don't need to worry about the screw traveling through the entire mandible because there's a shoulder on the screw that stops it. You can literally lift the patient's head up off the chair if you wanted to with these screws. They're that rigid. Now what I'm doing is I'm putting the arm on and I'm tightening them down to the 2 screws. And you see I'm going back and forth because the screws are never going to be perfectly parallel. So you tighten these down as you would a car tire. You go a little on one side and a little on the other, and then go back and forth, and you slowly tighten it down. And now I'm going to put my tracker arm on. So I've placed my tracker arm on, and that literally takes less than 5 minutes to do. You saw that case that Ed showed was not one of mine, but this doesn't take long, particularly in the mandible. It's really, really easy. In this case, this is an older case, and you have this software now available. I used edentulous fiducials. But you can use Xmark. I did a live course in Sarasota, Florida last weekend or 2 weekends ago with Dr. John Russo. And that patient was completely edentulous, and it didn't take me more than, 5-10 minutes to register the patient. Had no teeth. Now, what am I doing? I'm doing guided bone reduction. I use those preps that I showed you to make holes. You see the little holes? And I'm just going to connect the dots. And we're doing extensive bone reduction. Now you'll sort of notice that there's already a big piece of bone that I've removed. When you do bone reduction in these cases, you don't need to do the entire arch all at once. You can do half, put your implants in, and then do the other half if you want. That's what I did in this patient because this patient was on Xarelto, and I wanted to close the wounds as soon as I could. I didn't bother stopping the Xarelto because there's no need to, but he still would ooze a lot. So I did a part of it, and then I did the other part, and I closed it after I was done. You can see I've already put implants in, and now I'm putting the angled implant in. These EDX screws are so rigid that you can use the arm as a finger rest when you're driving in your implants. Always do system checks. After you reduce the bone, you can use the lateral bone and the lingual bone to do your system checks. And then we did an immediate hybrid on the mandible. We picked it up using the arms and the occlusal locks. And then we did the maxilla, and I'll show you the maxilla about 8 weeks later. I personally don't like to do maxillary cases or maxilla and mandible at the same time. It's too easy to mess up the occlusal plane or something like that. And when you have a denture in the maxilla, it's really easy to fix that later. So here's the maxilla. This is an all-on 6. In this case, I chose to do a midline stab incision to start, and I found my position. But since I was going to do a huge bone reduction, I also did a crestal incision. I like everything free. I think sometimes when people talk about minimally invasive surgery, they end up messing up the tissue more by not making nice, clean incisions than they do that if they just made the incision in the first place. So you can see I made the vertical incision. I did not extend it laterally. I just did a stab for the lateral incision. And in this case, again, this is an older case. You can see the fiducials are there. This is before X-Mark. X-Mark in the United States got released in March, the middle of COVID. So these cases were done before that with edentulous fiducials. So again, this was an edentulous fiducial case. It could have easily been X-Mark. I'm going to be showing you more X-Mark in a little bit. And then if I needed to, I could refine and then do my navigation. Now the patient is registered, in this case, touching the probe tool to the screws. Those screws were placed like 6 months before this case was done. When I did that, the last one you just saw the first part. So when I did the initial mandible, I put the screws in the maxilla for the second part. And you can see they'd work their way out through because of the denture. And then I do a system check. My osteotomies, you can see, I just go, with each drill, I just go all the way around and that I've exposed with that drill, and then I go to the next drill. And again, you can see the maxilla. I'm doing the angled implant. And in that case, you can see I haven't even driven in all the implants all the way because I torqued out. In other words, your drills are made to only go 45 Newton centimeters. Once you hit 45, you have to go by hand. And then you use your last drill length if you want to guide the depth. Now, in this case, I'm actually guiding my bone reduction in the posterior over the sinus because I don't want to cut a hole into the sinus. So you're going to see me using the straight hand piece. I'm going to be doing a lot of system checks. I'm actually looking right now doing system checks because I don't want to cut into the floor of the sinus. And now, one of the things that we used to do when we did freehand was we'd put our implants in and then we'd use a pair of rongeurs, go down through the hole and nibble away the bone with the rongeurs. You can do that now with navigated surgery. As Ed said, this is freehand surgery with the accuracy of guided surgery. So anything that you used to do when you did freehand surgery, you can now do guided. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing my bone reduction. Those implants are already in, and I just nibble away the bone, and I can save that bone if I needed to do any bone grafts. I did a chairside pickup, or I didn't, my prosthetic colleague did. And you can see we use these Avident dentures. The Avident dentures are very interesting. Those teeth are actually part of the puck. And these parts are a monolithic puck. So the thickness of the teeth is part of the structure of that restoration. So it adds strength and support to it. So they're much stronger than a prosthesis that's made with glued-in denture teeth. So I really highly recommend these if you can get them. And then this is the finished prosthesis in the patient's mouth. And you can see the patient still has sutures on the bottom from the first case. I think it was 8 weeks. And these are the means for the entire case. This is both maxillary implants and mandibular implants. My mean angular deviation is 2 degrees. Standard deviation is 0.8. And then my platform is under 1 millimeter, and my apical is 1.25. Those kind of numbers are because the system's so rigid. Now, this is another case. We're going to do another hybrid case. This is EDX screws and X-Mark. This is after the was released. So this is going to be in the mandible first. We're going to leave the proximal posterior teeth, but the entire anterior part's going to be a hybrid. What you're seeing here is the Surfix algorithm. What you do is you go to the top left screen and you pick 4 points around those 3 top left windows, and then all the rest are automatically put into the cross-sectional images you see on the bottom right. You want to make sure that anything you want to refine or you want to pick for registration is inside that pretty little rainbow that you see on the bottom left. Then I can superimpose my STL files if I want, which I did in this case. These were actually like a crown and bridge preps. The first thing I do is I plan my implants and I plan my platforms based on the restoration that I'm going to be putting in the patient's mouth. In this case, it's a hybrid type. Then I do my bone reduction. Now you're seeing this new software with the preps. They're little 1 by 1 millimeter, they're 1 millimeter diameter implants and or preps, and you put them in just above the level of the platform. You don't want to get them below the level of the platform because you're going to be putting your platforms in just below this. So again, I plan my implants, then I plan my bone reduction, and finally I plan my EDX screw positions. It's funny, they always come around 20 to 25 millimeters and either below or between the implants. So I'm measuring using the software, in this case, from the level of the alveolar ridge down just below the implants, but they could be between. Now, people often ask me, well, what if I put the EDX in the wrong place? And when I'm drilling my osteotomies, I hit the screw with my drill. That's not a problem. You would just stop just short of that. You can see the level of your depth on the target view when you drilled it. Remember that the software puts a striped line at your maximum depth drilling. So you'll know exactly where that screw is. And what you'll do is you'll finish the osteotomy to that depth or just short of it, all the way out to your final diameter, and then go on to your other implants. Then after you've put your other implants in, you take off the arm and you just finish that little bit of that osteotomy freehand to the depth. Now, in this case, I'm going to be doing, again, extensive bone reduction. So I'm going to be making a crestal incision. If I wasn't doing extensive bone reduction, I'd do stab incisions. Now you can see this was an old crown and bridge case that failed, recurrent caries. And I'm measuring with a caliper the depth, I think it was 20.3 millimeters that I showed you on the plan. So the first thing I do is the pilot hole on the top left. And then I put in my first screw. In this case, you're seeing I'm putting in a blue screw. That's in the middle on the top. Then I use the arm. I put the arm on, and I measure the position for the second screw. So on the bottom left, you can see I've put the second screw in where I think it's going to go based on using the arm. And then I put in my second screw. And then I'm going to put the arm in. Now, that blue arrow is showing you where that arm is. That arm needs to be bent away from the bone, okay? You want to bend that arm away from the bone so that it's not up tight against the bone, so that it doesn't interfere with either your bone reduction or your implant placement. And that's an easy thing to forget. All right. And then you tighten the nuts sequentially. And there's the arm in place, and you can see how far out of the way it is. So now you can move anywhere in the in the mandible you want, and you can actually use the arm as a finger rest. Okay. Now what I'm doing now is I'm registering the patient. I'm going to use some teeth. Teeth are great. If you're doing a terminal dentition case, those teeth, that even carious teeth, as long as they're solid and they're not moving, you can use them. If they're moving, you can use the spiky parts of bone around the implants or around the teeth that are gnarly and they're easy to pick out on the CT as your X mark points. In this case, I only used 3. You want to be as far around the arch as you can get. You don't want to be in just one little area. It's just like superimposing an STL file onto a CT. Think of it that way. So you want to spread all the way around the arch. After you've finished, it gives you what's called a spread quality. The bigger the spread quality, that's if you look on your left, you'll see it says 32628 mandible. If you look just down below, it says spread quality 24. The larger the spread quality, that means how far around the arch you are, the more accurate your registration can be. The other thing is that for each individual point, the software shows you where you touched and where you thought you touched. So if you'll see it says 0.71 millimeters. If you get large numbers, okay, like 1 or 3 millimeters, you know that when you're trying to fix this registration, that's the point where something's off. So those are the things that you look at when you're registering your patient. If you needed to, you would use the refinement tool now to refine the case. In this case, I didn't need to because my registration was so accurate. And now I'm ready to guide my bone reduction and my implants. So in this case, you see I've done bone reduction and placed the implants only on half the case because I don't need to do it all at once. If you're doing a static guide, you have to reduce the whole thing to get in order to get your guide in. And that's one of the problems with static guides. They force you to do everything up front. You can do a little bit at a time with this. So I do my extractions and my implants and my bone reduction as I see fit. I'm all done, and now what do? I remove the nuts, and then the arm, and then the EDX screws. And then the case was picked up at chairside. And this is the case in place. And again, you can see in the post-op CT where I placed those EDX screws. I've superimposed preps on top of the holes where the EDX screws went. This is the last case that I'm going to show. I think we're going to have plenty of time for questions. This was done with a different software. This was done with X-CAD. And if you're wondering how you're going to do this with X-CAD, if you export a plan as a model and there are teeth in the plan, then you can easily superimpose it inside the X-Guide software. You just need some way of registering that X-CAD plan as a model on the teeth that are present. You'll see how we did that here. We're going to be doing both the maxilla and the mandible in stages. So this is the X-CAD plan. Now, the beauty of this case was that the patient had some teeth that we could use to transfer this plan from the software, the X-CAD software, into the X-Guide software. There's different little tricks to do this, but the easiest way is to use teeth and models, because then you can jump whole arches at a time. So we did a digital wax up using X-CAD. We're going to be changing the position of this patient's teeth, and the provisionals will be made based on these changes. We then import that model into X-Nav software and use the teeth in the back of the mouth to superimpose this X-CAD virtual wax up that includes some teeth. So this was an easy one to shift back and forth. And I'm planning my case based on the provisionals, all right? So this is the provisional in place in the mandible after I placed my implants. And now I'm going to go up to the maxilla. I did bilateral sinus lifts on this patient, and then we're going to do serial extractions. I do probably more of this than I do anything. I'll take out some teeth, put implants in, let them integrate, and then jump the case to the implants. It's a really very predictable way of doing things in patients without doing a lot of bone reduction. So I've done bilateral sinus lifts. I'm doing serial extractions. In all the extraction sites, I've grafted, and then I wait for just 2 months, and then I plan using the patient's. You can see I've taken the provisionals. They were made from the X-CAD plan. I took them out of the patient's mouth. I put I put sticky fiducials on. The way I do this is I take those fiducials, I cut them off the adhesive, and I put them on with boxing wax. Right?
Make it dry.
And so I put them on with boxing wax, and then I take a CT of the patient's provisionals, put them in the mouth, and take a CT of the patient with the provisionals with the fiducials on in the patient's mouth. You can also do an intraoral scan of the patient if you want to be able to turn on and off the opposing teeth. So here is the maxillary dual scan of provisionals for a crown and bridge case. So if I wanted to use an intraoral scan, I could use those fiducials to superimpose the intraoral scan on. And this is a way of stacking STL files inside the X-Nav software. It also lets me use the opposing dentition. I can turn it on and off. When you use a dual scan, you can only get the arch of the dual scan. But if you take an intraoral scan at the same time, you can now turn on and off the opposing scan, if that makes sense to everyone, I hope. So there is I'm mapping the arch now, okay, and the maxilla, and then I'm planning with my dual scan. And I plan my screw positions for the EDX screws. And you can see I'm in the piriform rim nasal floor area. And I use the preps to do this. And you can use the alignment tool over on the top right, over here in this area, to align your screws if you want. And what I'm doing here is looking at the nasal floor because I want, and the nasal spine, because I really want good cortical bone. And this case was a little tricky because if you look on the top left screen, you're going to see how that the cortex disappears in the nasal spine. And I looked at that and I thought, man, this could be tough because there's no good cortical bone there. And when I went at the time of surgery, I had to move a screw because there really wasn't any good bone there. And so I went a little lateral, more towards the piriform rim to find some good solid bone. So I'm following from left to right as I go across. I'm using the surface algorithm, and I'm making sure all the areas that I want to register are going to be in the image. So I'm defining the surface that the software is going to look at. And then you see the yellow surface there. If you don't see a good solid yellow line, then you really shouldn't use that point for X mark. So you really want to see that nice, smooth, beautiful yellow line. And those are points that you can use for refinement. If it disappears and it's not clear in this yellow surface, then you don't want to use it because it'll be hard to find. This is really helping you with what's called thresholding. And this makes it, if it's not yellow, you want to pick a different point, something that you can see. Now I'm going to be doing minimal bone reduction in this case, but I still have to make a crestal incision because I'm going to be taking some teeth out. But it's not going to be a big crestal incision, and I'm going to use the vertical incision in the midline to find my cortical bone. And you can see I did my first vertical, and then I couldn't find that good, nice bone. So I extended the crestal incision a little bit on the right side so I could see the lateral part of the maxilla. And this is why, and I'm showing you this case to point out why you always start with a vertical. It gives you a lot of flexibility if you need to extend it, okay? The vertical midline. And there's always a frenum there, and you want to reduce that frenum anyway. So once you make an incision through it, it tends to scar down nice and tight. So it's almost like doing a frenectomy. So I didn't extend that vertical too far, or that crestal incision too far posteriorly, just enough to get this in place. Once again, I want to point out how far out of the field the tracker is. It's not in your way anymore when you do this. It's really very, very nice. Now what I'm doing is I'm X marking my patient, and you can see that beautiful yellow solid line around the cross-sectional images and on the 3D image. So I know when I do this that the software is going to be able to find that surface, and that's what you want. Again, look at it. I want to maximize my spread quality. This isn't the best spread quality, but then the patient's tiny, and I don't have a big AP spread. But look how tight my X marks are: 0.23 millimeters, 0.35. The worst one's 0.61. So these are really, really close registrations. And after I'm done, I do a system check, and you can see it looks the same wherever I'm doing it, in the mouth, on the tooth, and on the CT. I then put in my implants, and you can see this is the post-op superimposition. You can see my bone grafts. Okay, this was a tiny lady. These are I think some of the hardest cases to do. So I am pretty much finished. I'm pretty close to the time Poe asked me to. If you have questions, we have some online stuff at X-Nav, and I also have some online stuff. And I'm welcome to answer any questions.
请问各位医师有没有任何问题？现在是自由发问时间啊，不论是针对刚刚的Ed 的产品的解说，或是 Dr. Emery 根据临床上的一些示范。那发言之前，请记得先开麦克风。现在可以开了，好，现在可以开。
I see Dr. Yang there.
Yeah, Dr. Yang, yes. Dr. Huang, Dr. Yang.
There he is.
Yeah. 请问各位是有没有任何针对产品使用上，或者说目前有任何问题的，也都可以提问。OK， 目前 CT 所需打的固定位置。So, Dr. Emery, Dr. Chen was asking that. Do you have any suggestion of the screw position before we shoot the CT scan?
So before you well, I mean, I always try to put them in the symphysis and the piriform rim area. It's so easy compared to everywhere else. So that's really pretty much. That's where the best. It's just so easy to do it. That's what I would always shoot for.
What about a TriStar screw?
The what?
TriStar screw.
I'm talking about the EDX screws. As far as the TriStar screws, when you're using fiducials and you're doing full arch cases, if it's a dual arch, right? You're going to do a maxilla and the mandible. And a lot of the times I'll start with putting it, if the patient's got a mutilated dentition, like the first case I showed, I'll start with a denture on the maxilla, an immediate denture, and I'll do the hybrid. And so before I start the case, before I take a CT, I'll put the fiducials in the mandible, but I don't bother in the maxilla. And so then I go ahead and I take my CT and I plan the case and I make my maxillary denture. So when I'm extracting the teeth in the maxilla, I put my fiducials in then, right? And then I go ahead and do the mandible and use the fiducials in the mandible. So I'm only putting doing the quote unquote extra surgery on just the mandible, and I'll do them with just a little. When I used to do before X-Mark, I would just give a little bit of local and do a stab incision and just put the TriStar screws in with local. I wouldn't make a big deal out of it. I just tell the patient I was putting markers in. In those really complicated cases with extraoral, I don't make a big deal out of putting stab incisions in the skin because for those of you who do extraoral surgery, this is where we make incisions to put chin implants in. And the only people I would worry about putting them here would be someone who had a lot of color in their skin or keloided. Otherwise, I wouldn't even think twice about it. The incisions are so small, they go right away. And in really atrophic mandible, with the EDX screws, little tiny stab incisions in the mouth are all you need. Maxilla, I always start with a midline vertical incision.
So, Poe, I just want to make sure everyone's clear in understanding one thing is that with X-Mark, you don't have to use the TriStar screws.
You don't need them.
You can still use them. but they're only really necessary now for cases where the bone is fully edentulous and is very smooth, and there's not a lot of area to determine exactly where to place a mark. But in almost every case, X-Mark works. There are certain cases where you still want to apply the TriStar screw, but that's the power of X-Mark, is that you don't need to put those TriStar screws. You get rid of that surgical position.
So with last 2 weeks ago, like I said, I was in Florida doing a live course, and the patient had extracted the teeth quite a while back, and it was pretty smooth. And we had a dual scan denture. And in the mandible, what we did was we used the mental foramen on each side. And then on for the midline, we had a dual scan, and there was a small little groove in the denture for a labial frenum. And so I put a mark on the CT. My third spot was right below that groove for the labial frenum. And before I made my incision, I put the denture in the patient's mouth, had them bite down, and I went right through the tissue, right at that frenum, and made a mark in the bone. And so I used two mental foramen and that mark in the bone to register the patient, and it was dead on. It didn't take any time at all. And you could do that in the maxilla as well. So if you've got a really smooth, I probably wouldn't use those screws. I'd be hard pressed to use those screws ever again once you get X-Mark.
So you don't use TriStar screw ever again?
You don't need them. Not with X-Mark, you don't need them. You might, but as Ed said, if you had somebody really smooth and no denture, no dual scan.
So two on the both sides,
mm-hmm.
and one on the middle and the frenum.
Yep.
Okay.
But if you were hesitant, just go ahead and put the screws in. It'll be quick.
I want to make clearly that you said if we are doing the both dentition, both maxilla and mandible. So you place screws firstly on the mandible. And when do you place the TriStar screw on the maxilla? I didn't get it.
Well, if you're doing two arches and you're not doing them at the same time.
Oh, okay.
You're not doing them at the same time, then you could just, whichever one you're going to do first, you put them on that. So I personally like to do them. I like to do the mandible first on patients who are edentulous, because once they get that, they're hooked. Because maxillary teeth, maxillary dentures aren't that bad unless you're really atrophic, but mandibular dentures are awful. Everybody hates them.
Okay.
So they're really happy if you do the mandible first. It's like, wow, you've changed my life, right?
Okay, I think we have a couple questions.
Yes.
One is 3Shape Implant Studio and DTX Studio. Okay, so they are considering that because we are compatible with 3Shape and DTX Studio right now. And what is your preference and your opinion? Which one you will prefer to use with X-Guide? Yeah.
For me?
Yeah, for you.
Question for me?
Yes.
Well, 3Shape has just come out. I haven't used 3Shape with X-Guide yet. Mm-hmm. I've been using DTX with X-Guide, particularly in full arch cases. So
what will be your workflow if you're using DTX for the
well, if you like planning with DTX, then keep planning with it and just jump into the X-Guide. I've been using there is a lab that I work with a lot that really likes DTX, and it works well with Avident because you can stack STL files with it. A lot of docs like 3Shape and the prosthetic planning with 3Shape. So I'll probably be using that a lot, particularly with docs that want to make custom healing abutments. And because you can, it's very powerful there. The other thing, the DTX, they have a little provisional that looks almost like a Maryland bridge for single tooth, so you can do immediate provisionals. DTX is really good for that. For my routine cases, I use just X-Guide software, single tooth, 2 or 3 teeth, or even and a lot of times I'll start with my with the X-Guide software and send that to the lab, and then let them mess with their prosthetic software with whatever they want to do, and then send it back to me as an X-Guide plan. So for me as a surgeon who works with a whole lot of different doctors, they all have their labs that they want to use, and they have their prosthetics that they want to use, and they don't want me dictating what they want to use. So I'm perfectly happy to work with 3Shape or DTX. And I showed you Exocad.
Yeah.
I showed you the 3 major players in the world. The only one that's missing there is Co-Diagnostics. So, you can play in all these different prosthetic worlds with the X-Guide. It's open if you know what you're doing. It's really easy now with 3Shape and DTX. There was a question about, I see some questions. For immediate loading, provisional screw access holes are always drilled after the surgery according to where the MUAs are, instead of making those holes before surgery according to the virtual plan. Is this correct? Well, we always make the holes ahead of time, smaller than they need to be according to the virtual plan. Because the screws are always, the titanium cylinders are always going to be really close to where you plan them. And you might have to do a little bit of adjusting. So we always make the holes ahead of time. Is it possible to create a program that will select the 3 dots manually? Or with the new device, the system could calibrate by itself? I don't understand that question. Is it possible to create a program that will select the 3? Oh, that'll
dots. Does it mean the dots on X clip?
I think they mean, is there a way to make the software select the X points? That'd probably be a question for Ed.
Yeah. So the reason we don't do that, theoretically that is possible, and we've talked about it, but we need to know that the point that you're picking is one that you can touch. So we really depend a little bit on the doctor to pick the point, because they've got to know that they've got to reach it. If I do it automatically, I don't know what capabilities, I
think sometimes we have orthodontic patients, and they will have small screws inside the mouth as well. So sometimes the X-Guide will misrecognize which one is the dots on the X clips. So it actually causes us to give up the navigation sometimes if they are having the orthodontic screws inside. Yeah.
I'm a bit confused by that, because you're saying so X-Mark solves that problem, just so you know, because in the case where an X clip is not recognized properly, you can just say, fine, I'm not going to use the X clip, I'll use X-Mark. So X-Mark does solve that solution. There are ways, and we should probably do another training session with you guys on showing you ways for us to improve the way what it finds as the BBs versus what is something that might be in the mouth. But but why don't you and I take that offline? And I think there's another training session we could have with Martin.
Of course.
On how to improve what he can do. He could actually go online, grab into onto the machine and make some parameter change to simplify and improve that.
As Ed said, the really great part about X-Mark is if the X-Clip isn't working out or the patient that has happened to me more than once, I do the X-Clip CT, patient doesn't come back for 2 months and they come back and they have a brand new crown underneath where I put the X-Clip and I've got a CT. And you can't use that X-Clip anymore because it doesn't fit. That doesn't matter anymore. You just take that same X-Clip, put it in thermoplast, put it back on the teeth, and then just use it to hold the tracker and use X-Mark. That is really very, very, very helpful.
It also makes it easier if you have a small field of view. If you've done a small field of view CT, right. The X-Clip doesn't have to be in the field of view anymore, so you don't have that problem. This is where X-Mark really does complement the X-Clip. And not to say that the X-Clip works really well. And if I look at total of doctors and machines out there, still the majority of machines use X-Clips every single day. Mm-hmm. But you're seeing the rise of X-Mark as doctors are choosing a different option depending upon what that case is. So X-Mark makes it just simpler. So I think it's a nice option to add to the device. I was doing a couple of cases yesterday, and there was a little rock in an X-Clip, and in the old days I would have sat there and fussed with it. I don't bother. I just push it on really hard, and then I just do refinement, and it's just so nice because you got an X-Clip with sort of a bother, and now it's perfect. So refinement and X-Mark are just gigantic additions to what everybody already has. Once COVID stops bothering us all, you'll all have it. Thank God for the vaccine.
Yep. And Dr. Chen is asking that if not doing the bone reduction, can we use flapless? And yes. Screw in the implant. Does that make the precision any difference?
No, the huge thing that's changed in the full arch cases is the EDX screws allow you to be minimally invasive if that's the way the case presents. If somebody's like a lot of bone and you're not doing bone reduction, you don't need to lay a flap to put those in. You just a stab incision. That's all you need. And when I'm doing some big crown and bridge cases, I used to make a little jig to sit on tooth preps, or I'd make dupe temps. I don't do that anymore. I just put a couple of EDX screws in these crown and bridge cases, and because it only takes about 5-10 minutes to put on the EDX screws. And then if you have tooth preps, the X-Mark is so fast, it's amazing. So this is a game changer for sure. Everybody was wanted to do full arch cases. Well, you can do them now, and you can do them with extreme precision and accuracy.
Okay.
And you can do really what used to be impossible cases like scleroderma patients and rheumatoid arthritis, and I showed you that lady was awful. Any of us who see scleroderma patients, it's an awful disease, and there's no way to guide surgery in those patients. Now there is.
Yeah.
Can you translate that last question? I saw one come up there.
So Dr. Ling is asking that, of course, we know the X-Mark coming with refinement. We are working on the regulatory process right now. So, but in the future, even without the X-Mark, even without using X-Mark, can the X-Clip workflow be refined as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Once you have X-Mark, you can refine an X-Clip. So you can refine any attachment. So we call X-Mark an attachment, and we call an X-Clip an attachment, and you can refine either one to make them better.
I think that's very important because sometimes we still have to face the rocking problems.
Right, and the refine, you can just quickly refine. And I'm finding our very advanced doctors do that very regularly now, even if they're an office that uses X-Clips most of the time, you'll find that they refine probably, 10% of their cases at least are being refined on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So, we always knew that there was that always playing around with the rocking, and sometimes you still can't get it perfect. That can be related to the CT, but now you can just go ahead and refine it.
Okay. Many audience asking questions. Okay, Dr. Emery, how could we use the X-Smart or X-Mark to full edentulous patients? Thank you.
So, if somebody's fully edentulous and the bone is really smooth, that means they've got a denture. Okay, so they're going to do a dual scan more than likely on the arch that they want to place the implants, and there'll be grooves in the if it's in the mandible or maxilla for the frenum, or areas when you did your extension for your denture. You can look where they are on the CT and pick points just below those. And before you lay your flap, just take a starter drill and drill right through those grooves. And the other thing is, that in the mandible, you can pick the foramen, and then you can look at the surface for irregularities that you think you'll be able to see at the time of surgery. So you can do that. And as I said, I did a case 2 weeks ago, completely smooth mandible, and it didn't take much time at all. And if you want to, you can put in the screws, but I don't think I'll probably ever put screws in again, to be honest with you.
We are still selling TriStar screw. So
I'm not selling it. The TriStar screws are great. I love TriStar screws. You must sell them.
So Dr. Emery, you literally use the mental foramen as
you just right at the top of the mental frame, and you just where
it's okay to touch it.
Yeah, you just touch it. Yeah. Okay. You don't touch the nerve, you're touching there's a groove in the bone. You can see it. Okay. Yeah, you don't want to go into the foramen. It's the top and above the foramen. That's a great question. Poe, because you don't want to put it down into holes. Like if you drill a hole through, if you put the denture in and then take a starter drill and drill a hole right where where the labial frenum was, you don't put the screw in, you don't put the probe in the hole. That's real important. You put it above it, just on the edge of it. You don't want to go inside the mandible, okay? You're going to touch it just above.
So you will, before you take the CT scan, you will drill some holes. So later on you can... No need to.
No, you don't need to do that. No. Okay. No, you don't. And if you did, you in the mandible, just use the mental foramen, and then if you can find little irregularities in the alveolar ridge, you can use those.
What about maxilla?
Same thing. You just look for irregularities. Now you got to remember, most of the patients are going to have a few teeth there, right? Almost everybody, most of the cases that come through the door are mutilated dentition cases. And if they're not, and you're worried about it, then use the TriStar screws. You can use them.
Okay. So Jackie is asking, are there some tips for you to make sure that the screw axis of the temporary cylinders of the 70 to 30 degree anyway just come out from the axis? Put the implant according to the navigation.
So I think the question is about timing of the hexes on the implants, or timing of the platform at the time of surgery. Where are they relative to the rotation of the off-angled abutments? And so when you drive your implants in, you drive them to depth, and then you look at your carrier and you adjust them based on what you see in the patient's mouth. So you're adjusting your timing the way you would as if you're freehand, and you can plan that on the software. The X-Guide software has timing indication on it, and so does DTX, and so does 3Shape. I haven't used ExoCAD, but they all have timing, and you can see the timing. And so you use your carriers on your implants to duplicate the timing that you've put in the mouth. You put on your plan.
What do you by timing? I don't get it.
Well, every implant has a flat.
Yeah.
Or in the old TriStar Nobel, there's a triangle, and the rotation of the implant affects how the parts connect to it. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think the question, I think it's from Jackie, is how do you plan those 17 and 30 degree implants and the parts? On X-Guide software, there's an angle.
Yes.
Right. There's an angle to plan those things. You can do it. And I do it a lot in the aesthetic zone, right? There's some implants, the different implants have off-angled screwdrivers, and there's a range that you can get an off-angle screwdriver in and still have the screw retained restoration. And you can plan all that in the X-Guide software. Now, you just need to know how big the abutment is, its height and its angle. And it works for all implants. It's not just Nobel, it's not just Straumann, it's any implant. You just need to know the parts, and you put it into the software.
Okay.
You have to have the right version of software, so I don't know.
You mean when we design the implant, there's a flat? Do you mean this part and the abutment, cuff height and the angulation?
Yeah, it's Ed would know which version of the software it's in.
Yeah, we do have it. Yeah.
I don't remember which version, but it's a version that's available to everyone now. So they should be able to have that software if they don't have it. If they're running an older version, or they may not recognize how to do it, and it's just a little learning experience. It's very easy to do the planning of it. Jackie's point of how do I make sure I match the plan, because a small change in the angle there has a big change if you have a high angled abutment. And we are looking at working a way to be able to match that perfectly via navigation, but not quite ready on that yet. But we have an idea of how to make it match, so that you would just, at the very end, you would just tweak it until your timing was perfect. So we'll put a sort of a patterned on the torque wrench and just tweak it around to the point in which it's perfect. So we have something coming from that probably middle of next year, of 22. But the planning can absolutely be done, and most people don't seem to have too much trouble hitting it once they've planned it properly.
Yeah, as Ed said, the big thing is, knowing the angle and putting it into the plan. That's without.
We actually have some doctors figure out that to put some design the small implants on the tilted implants to indicate the bump axis when export to STL file, and that works well for communicate with the lab. Okay.
But if you use the abutment feature on ours, that will come out with the you'll be able to, that'll go out with the STL.
Oh, I will talk to you later on this question. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a question about can the X-Guide software be combined with all the DTX stuff? The answer is yes. When you plan and anything you plan in DTX, the implant part of it gets transferred into the X-Guide. So anything you plan inside the DTX and you put on the implants is reflected in that plan when you pull it into the X-Guide. You might necessarily see every little detail that you see in DTX, but it's been accounted for in the plan.
Last time we tried to export DTX to X-Guide, we found a problem that only the service scanning STL files and implant design was exported.
Yes.
The virtual crown was not there, so we were confused. Where are the virtual crown?
That might be related to, and I'll check on this, but I think that might be related to the fact that we don't handle multiple STLs yet in X-Guide. Mm-hmm. In the next release will be multiple STLs to be able to handle, so we can do that. That's in version 3.4, which we're hoping is released in late August. So that's coming. But I still thought we could get everything. You can still do all your planning in DTX, and the plan will come in. Hopefully, you're not having to change your plan too much while you're once you've done all that work in DTX. You obviously can. So more of those connections are being made with both DTX and soon to be with 3Shape. As the softwares, as we find what people need and want, more of those features will be coming over with the different plans. So all that stuff happening.
Like if you import a DTX plan into X-Guide and change an implant, the STLs disappear and they become generic.
Yeah. Okay, I think we take the last question. But I think we already had the Dr. Yang is asking that clearly sometimes a problem that rocks more or less every single case. Do you have any thoughts on changing the design?
So I can just make a comment on that. The predicate device that I started working with, 15 years ago, we would take a polyvinyl siloxane impression, pour it up in stone, then do a 1.5 millimeter Essex suck down on top of it, and then reline that with acrylic at chair side. And you know what? They still rocked. So, and even if, the only way you can keep something from rocking is by putting it across the arch. That's where we get cross-arch stabilization. And then some of the early systems did that, but then there's so much stuff in the mouth that gets in the way. I think it's important to remember that all the accuracy and precision data that you've got that shows how good the system works were done with X-clips. And that data reflects the accuracy and precision you can get with what you have right now. We've tried a lot of different materials, and it doesn't really make any difference. You can't stop things from rocking unless you go across the arch, and you're going to hate that because then there'll be stuff in your way. So we know with what we have right now, but it's so convenient to use, you can be accurate and precise. that data came from the X-Clip with a lot of different doctors in different institutions. So, you know, we're always looking for better ways of doing something. So if you come up with something, I would love to hear it.
So I do want to add one thing in there regarding that. One of the other benefits of X-Mark is the fact that you don't have to take it on and off the patient. You just can make it the day of surgery and then do everything with X-Mark. Yep. So you don't have as much on and off. Most of the time you get rocking is because you're taking on and off. The other thing is if the teeth are really smooth, then you can use like I don't know, like the buttons that you would temporarily put on there to give them some undercuts. But I've done a fairly large study at looking at this stuff. It's only should be happening in maybe 10% of the cases where the rocking is significant, where you can't control it.
I think sometimes that the surgeries it's not on the same day, so they'll store it in the refrigerator and try to keep the shape intact, but sometimes it will still reform a little bit. So right. Yeah.
That problem gets solved with X-Mark.
Yeah, I think what Ed just pointed out is a big deal. You just make them chair side and you put them on one time. It's like they don't move nearly as much.
So I think the X-Mark and the refinement will solve the problem as well. Okay, so Jackie was asking.
Well, Jude asked the question, you know, like if the patient bit on the X-Clip while the CT was taken, it doesn't matter now with X-Mark, you can fix it. So again, X-Mark solves a lot of these problems.
我回答一下 Jackie. So sorry, I will use Chinese to answer a little bit. 所以想跟 Jackie 是说，对，刚刚其实我们在讨论就是那个我们的X-Guide 目前的 implant 的设计软体，它是会有一个 flat 没有错去 indicate 说你希望你要调整的你的这个 implant 的这个角度，但目前来讲的话还没有办法做到就是完全能够 navigate 这个部分，所以如果说是需要调整这个就是 platform 的角度，就是里面应该说里面的 hex 或是 connection 的位置的时候，还是必须要用手动的部分，但是他们目前也尝试在解决这个问题。Okay, Mr. Wu is asking for maxillary cases. Can we also use radial pack bead stick on the hard palate as marker instead of tri-star screw?
Only with X-Mark.
Okay, only with tri-star screw right now. Okay.
Today only with tri-star. When you have X-Mark, you would probably be able to use that method because you could use those. You could mark those as markers. Yeah. Because with X-Mark, you have that broad. You can use anything. With the screw method, where you're actually using the screws themselves, you can only use the tri-star screws.
Yeah, great answer. Okay, 所以还有其他一些问题吗？ OK， 我做一个简单的总结哦，就是说，因为我们今天介绍了蛮多这个关于 X-Mark ED X-Screw 这个我们即将希望在年底可以上市的新功能。那事实上在我们的经验里面，我们自己的临床经验里面 ，X-Guide 大概90%我可以很有自信，大概90%的 case 是可以处理的。但是势必还是会有一些状况是临床上就是说会比较需要花时间的比如说不太好锁 tri-star screw 啦或者说这个 X-Clip 会 rocking 的问题。那这就是为什么后来 X-Nav 他们会继续升级他们的软体用 X-Mark 来解决这个 virtual mapping 的问题以及用 refinement 去解决这个当我这个 tracker 可能会有 rocking 的这个问题所以大概可以了解说 X-Nav 他们的公司的习惯是，当他们发现在临床上有需要被解决或是可以再继续努力的地方他们会一直在这方面去就是做研发研究我们已经去他们这个办公室好几次了其实他们大部分的人都是 engineer 非常认真的想办法在做这个软体上的提升软体上的提升这样子。那今天大家所看到的所有的这些看到的听到的这些新功能新器械，我们也很希望可以在年底的时候可以拿到这个新的准证license 那就可以为台湾的这个医生服务那当然我们一定会先最照顾就是我们的现有的这个 current 的 user 我们一定会有一些方案先提供给大家那也非常感谢这个大家的今天的参与。那请问还有没有任何想要跟这个X-Nav Ed 或是 Dr. Emery 询问的我想刚刚其实有一些问题是关于那个 3Shape 跟 DTX 的一些整合性的方案那目前我们现在还正在讨论当中，因为感觉起来好像有一些这个讯息上还有一些落差，所以我们不会尽量赶快把它补齐那也加上说刚刚 Ed 有讲这个 STO file 以前是 single superimpose 它接下来也可能会朝向这个 multiple superimpose 去解决一些需要更多这个影像上整合的问题这样子。Okay. So I think it's about time. Dr. Emery and Ed, thanks very, very much for your lectures today. You have a few words to talk to our Taiwanese audience.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I am excited to come back to Taiwan. Hopefully soon we'll all be, our world will be, our planet will be well enough that we can travel again. And I am excited to come get mangoes, so I'll be there as soon as I can.
I will treat you the xiaolongba.
And again, thanks, Poe, and everybody at High Clearance for the opportunity to talk to you again. I reiterate everything Ed just said. And the mangoes are great, by the way.
Yeah, the mango slush is great.
They were great. I remember when you put one of those giant bowls in front of me, I'll never eat it. It was gone so fast.
我们是那个永康街的那个很大碗的芒果冰。OK， 好，谢谢。黄医师有没有想那个老朋友那个和我们的 Dr. Emery 讲几句话？
我已经跟他讲过了。
是，谢谢黄医师，谢谢。好，那今天的这个 X-Day X-Nav Technologies 线上会议圆满结束。那谢谢大家热情的参与。那也希望接下来我们不止在线上见，也可以实体见面。不论他们来台湾，或者是我们去美国，我们都相当的期待。谢谢大家，谢谢，拜拜。See you next time. Bye bye.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. Take care.